what I'd like to do today is to walk through the items on our Module 2 initial assessment. So I did post interim, these are estimated midterm grades, but that was based on the assignments and assessments I've scored so far. There is more credit that's going to be posted throughout the week, so you should see your midterm average fluctuate, and if you've completed solutions in particular, you should see the midterm average increase by the end of the week. So I had to give an interim grade report just for where we stood based on how much had been evaluated and the credit that was posted. But thank you all for getting the first attempt of the Module 2 assessment completed by the deadline Tuesday. That helped a great deal. And or yesterday, I guess that was yesterday. So what we have is a case where 12 students attempted the first version of the Module 2 assessment. There were 18 questions. The average score for the class was a bit low. So the average for the class ran a little lower than what we usually see, but that's okay. That's why reconciliation and the item analysis walkthrough is helpful. For a module assessment that allowed students to use 60 minutes, the average student took 45 minutes to complete the assessment. So one of the things that may help improve scores with module assessments from this point forward is that, you know, if students aren't so rushed and we're not under the gun to get so much in, and I don't know how much the assignments and submissions in your other courses were a factor this last week, but I got the impression that some students were rushed and that a number of them were catching up. In terms of the mix of difficulty, the Blackboard algorithm indicated that 1 question was considered easy, 3 were hard, and 14 were medium in difficulty. So that's not a bad mix. We don't want too many easy or too many hard, but as long as we have a good mix, we have a few of each, that's good. So what I'd like to do at this point is just walk through the items that pose the greatest challenge for students. The multi-answer, a multi-answer question posed the greatest challenge for most students. A student is required to capture sensible data, sensible detail about the amount of data that is stored and the space remaining on the system disks before logging off. The data collected must overwrite any outdated information from previous sessions using a file named storage used.dat. So does everyone understand the interest? Can everybody picture this scenario we're talking about? Here's a quick question for you. How many of you had your virtual machine running while you were taking the test? Did anybody do that?
No.
No.
Would it be okay if I suggested that was a good thing to do?
I'd be mildly confused, but hey, I managed to make it to class using my phone.
Okay.
Thank God one of my devices decided to at least walk despite the network being down.
Yes, I've heard that the network has been down, and thank you for joining the class. Can you see my screen?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so this first multi-answer question posed the greatest challenge for most students. So we wanted, student is required to capture sensible data about the amount, sensible detail about the amount of data that's stored. Courtney, I'm going to mute your microphone, okay?
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you. So the data collected must overwrite. Now, which of these two methods will overwrite? Is it a single right arrow or is it a double right arrow? Which one overwrites?
The single right arrow, the double appends.
The single arrow overwrites, the double arrow appends. That is correct, okay? Now it says important, after the capture, two separate lines must be added to the end of the storage.dat file. So what we're gonna do to storage.dat is we're gonna overwrite any content. That means that one of the commands that's used has to be a single arrow or the overwrite doesn't occur. Does everyone understand why this choice is important? Hello, hello. So the first part of this scenario is whatever we collect, we want a fresh write to the data file. And then after the the detail from the disk is written, when that data is written to the file, we have to add two separate lines to the end of the storage.dat file, okay? A statement that reads, this ends disk space log capture and the current date when the capture was performed, okay? So if you use the echo command with this statement, and then you use a double arrow, it'll put this ends disk space log capture and tack it onto the end of that file. What, does anyone want to see this? Like, so you can, you want to,
Sure.
Yes, please.
yeah, let's take a look at this and see how it looks in real life, okay? All right, so I have my VirtualBox PowerBook, my PG Book machine. And once again, it's perfectly fine for you to have your virtual machine open while you're taking an assessment, right? It's not going to be a problem if you do that. Oh, come on. I'm seeing a pattern here today. The internet is down, it's up, it's down. My stuff is running, it's not running. There's a lot of, I know this is October, but it doesn't feel like Halloween yet. I'm not sure. Or a full moon yet. Now I have two machines running, so just to keep things simple, I'm going to go ahead and pause this one because I don't want it right now. And then I'm going to close this and save the machine state. So that's going to clear the memory, and that way I'm going to have better outcomes with my other virtual machine. So in case you're running multiple virtual machines, that's a nice trick. So Sorry for the delay. I'm waiting for this thing to respond. There we go. So here's an important thing to consider, and I thought I would mention this while we're in the mix on this screen before I forget. Okay. Does everyone remember what we reviewed in class about how to remotely access the PG book in my office and create a directory? Yes, no, maybe?
Sadly, no, I don't remember.
Okay. Okay, let's do this. Yeah, we have 10. The last part of your solution asks you to connect to a PG book that's running in my office. So you use the SSH command. Is this ringing a bell?
Yeah.
For some it is, yes, okay. Now, the IP address that we're using that's the network that's running in my office on campus, okay? And I'm using SSH because I want to connect securely. And when I do my work, if I'm sharing a system with someone, this is how I would connect to a Linux system that supports dozens or even hundreds of users, right? So I'm going to hit this, and it's asking me for my PG book password. And I enter my password. And this is kind of interesting. So it says, okay, there's a system restart that's required. And that's significant. You may see this on your virtual machine, and I want you to ignore it. Okay. There may be no consequences if you run the command that's on that screen, but the problem is the PG book machine, I think, is version 16. And when you upgrade to version 18, there may be some things that don't work the same. So if you want to have fewer headaches for the rest of the semester, don't I know some of you are adventurous and you like to do things on your own. It may require you to, delete and then import the appliance all over again, depending on what happens. Which machine am I on right now? I just used SSH to connect to this machine.
Yeah,
So-
we're on yours.
Yeah. We're on my machine in my office now. We're not on the virtual machine that's running on my laptop. That's the correct answer. So if I look, and here's where I was going with this. If I go into mod 2 solution, using the CD command, I should be able to list the directories, and I can see which students have actually been in here to use the mkdir command to make a directory with their first initial and last name. What am I trying to tell you? Well, there are 12 students in the class, and only 5 have logged in remotely to this screen and walked through the last steps of the solution and navigated into the mod 2 solution directory, and then I'm going to create a new directory, and it's in honor of an old high school friend of mine that was picked on mercilessly. His name was Mortimer Engelbert Snenglefart. I am not making this up. Mortimer was picked on. The bullies in our high school classes were ruthless, and poor Morty got picked on a lot. And a lot of us tried to help him out, but basically his middle name was Engelbert and his last name was Snenglefart. True story, not making this up. So in the interest of demonstrating what those, if you see your name here, thank you for completing the last steps of your solution for the module, right? Glad you did it. If you don't see your name here, what I want you to do is to walk through the same steps we've just demonstrated. And I don't want you to wait to do it. I want you to start up your virtual box or your MacBook. And I want you to use these commands to get in here. Now, in my case, I'm going to type in mkdir, and I'm going to use M for Mortimer, E for Engelbert, and then Sningel fart. And now if I hit, if I enter a directory command, I see the new directory for my long lost high school friend. Okay. Now I can remove that later, and I probably will, but I just wanted to share with you in case you had missed the walkthrough in a previous class. Are there any questions about what you need to do to finish your Module 2 solution, the last steps? And some of you may be asking, well, what if I already submitted? Just do this and then submit again. And then I'll delete the first submission. Okay? Any questions here? All right. So I'm going to exit out of here. And that's the one thing that I wanted you to capture. So you go into this. I'll be able to see everything. If you captured this screen, I'll be able to see how you logged in using SSH. Then I'll be able to see that you changed into the Mod 2 solution directory. Then I'll be able to see that you used the make directory command to create your own directory. And then when you use the list-al, it'll show your directory after it's been created. And then when you have exited properly, it'll show the connection is closed. Now that's really critical because if you don't do that last part, you're still logged in, and that can muck up the works for others. So this is what I need you to capture on screen for the very last part of Module 2. Okay. Any questions about this before we move on? Oh, there we go. So I use the clear command just to clean the terminal up. So when we do this other stuff, it makes sense. Getting back to our assessment, right? So the first thing we have to do is capture sensible detail about the amount of data that is stored and the space remaining on the system disks before logging off. So I'm going to try this command right here. This gives me information about the disk data, and the -H gives me sensible data. If I don't do that, I get a very different command. So let's see what that looks like. Whoops. I'm going to do df-h, and that's sensible data. So it tells me that I have I have a 1.9 gigabyte volume or disk on my PG book, and 1.9 of it's available and none of it is used. Okay. It gives me, so it shows me in megs and gigs. And what happens if I leave the -H off of this? Well, let me show you. That's why these options are really important to understand. What it gives me instead of 1.9 gigs or 6.4 gigs, I get a string of kilobytes. And then I have to kind of do some math. I'm like, well, how big is this? Right? And who wants to do that? Right? Wouldn't it be easier to just look and say, oh, it's 23 gigs large. Wow, that's a lot of gigabytes. That's a pretty big disk. Okay. That's why the -H is so important. Okay. You'll see that all the time. a single letter makes all the difference in terms of how things look. Any questions so far? So I'm going to take this and I'm going to write it to a file called storageuse.dat. So I'll go ahead and use df-h and then the single right arrow, and it's storage used.dat. I hit enter and it's instantaneous and I don't see anything on the screen. Why don't I see anything on the screen? Can somebody tell me? Where did the data go?
It went to storage used at dot.
Right. And if I want to view that to see if it's in there, all I have to do is use the cat command and then say storage used.dat. Thank you, Courtney. And there's the contents of my storage used.dat. Okay. So that's what I'm doing with the first option. Let's look at the other options. Use cat to append the statement to storage used.dat. Can I use cat to append this to the end? Well, if I try that, I get all sorts of errors. But you can try it and see, okay? Now, I want to add the date to the end, and I want the statement that reads, this ends disk space log capture. So I'm going to use the echo command, and then I'm going to hit this, enter this, and I'll show you if I do this, echo, this ends disk space log capture. Now, if I hit enter, what's going to happen with this? It echoes that statement, anything in the quotation marks. That's the first part of the command. But if I want to add it to the end of that file, which am I going to use? This or this?
The double.
The double, right? So I'm going to say echo, this ends disk space log capture, append storage used.dat. Well, I want to see if that worked. I want to see if there is a line that's been added to the end that says this right here. So I'm going to use the cat command again. And all I'm doing is hitting my up arrow key. And sure enough, now I have an extra line appended to the end. That's what this option is saying right here. Use echo to append. Now I didn't say use echo with this command, double arrow, double arrow. I wanted to see if you knew that this was append. And then the last thing is date, right? So I can have date, double arrow, storage used.dat. So that's the last thing I'm going to do. Date, double arrow, storage used.dat. And I want to see if that worked. So now I have the line at the end with the date time group. Okay. Now, if I do this, what is that going to do? Is that going to give me a clean slate to start with? No. It's going to keep adding the end results. to the end. So now, when I look at it, I've added that instead of giving me a clean slate and a single set of data, I have two sets of data, and that gets to be pretty unwieldy after a time, right? So there are cases where you want to append, and there are cases when you want to overwrite. And the whole point of that question was to give you some options, right? I think it's handy to have a terminal open when you're taking your assessment. And I would advise you to try that, okay? Any questions about this item? Okay, so here is another multiple choice question that created some headaches for people. A Linux user engages super user to create a new user group with add group and enters the name CSC 239 STT users. A notice appears on the screen and the command fails. The message states, please enter a username matching the name regex configuration variable. What does that gibberish mean, right? And how should the Linux user resolve this matter in the most expedient manner, right? So that particular error is either in the study guide or in the study guide addendum. Someone has anyone seen this? Oh, it's also in the reading, I think, right? So
I saw something on the stuff in the study guide.
yes. So the name is not in the proper format. Use an acceptable expression for the group name. So it's asking you to use an acceptable expression for the group name. And essentially what you want to do is, I think you got to shorten it or something about that expression that's a problem. But usually it just means, yeah, you're not, the name you've chosen is creating a problem with the operating system. And there are some commands and some names that you can't use because they're reserved. They're already in use by the operating system, and that's part of the problem. Any questions about this item in particular? In the interest of time, I wasn't going to go and try each one of these on the terminal, but if anybody has an interest in seeing that work, let me know. All right, so I'm going to keep going down
Yes,
this.
please.
Say again?
I would like to see how it looks in the terminal.
Okay. All right. I'll tell you what, why don't we review some more questions and then we'll go back and demonstrate. All right.
Okay.
Okay. Because it is 4:15 and the class ends at 1:15, and I want to make sure we have enough time to review each of the items. But all right. So the second one you want to see. A most common method. A student performing scientific computing on an open source platform has executed the following commands. I see cut, I see paste, and then I see this stuff going on the screen. And then I see join, right? What common method is represented in the image below? The answer is called data wrangling. So one of the reasons that we walk through this activity in our solution is because when you use Linux machines or Raspberry Pis, and a Raspberry Pi is Linux based, if you connect sensors up to that computer and you're capturing all sorts of data, a lot of times there are headers or there's information appended at the end that's troublesome. And between cut and paste and join, you can stitch data elements together in the manner that you need. So in the exercise we walked through in the solution, we ended up combining some things together. So here you see 1, 2, 3, 8, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 5. And this information is inserted in between the 1, 2, 3 and the 8, 3. Does everybody see that?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you have an initial exam, here's the midterm, and there's the final, and that's the whole point of what we're doing. All right. The proper term for this symbol. So in the following command, the highlighted symbol shown is in bold, is often described incorrectly by those new to scientific computing applications or Linux. The proper term is what? TAC. We don't want to sound like a novice. And one of the things that we included in the addendum or the study guide was just some basics about pronunciation, right? Does anyone know what symbol a bang is?
Exclamation point.
Yes. What about a pound?
The hashtag.
Hashtag. Yeah. Yeah. The tic-tac-toe thing. Yeah. Does anyone know what tic-tac-toe is? I shouldn't ask you questions like that, should I? That's really old school. Okay, a constant. You have a constant in Excel. What are we saying? We have an Excel spreadsheet and there's a value in a cell that doesn't change, but it's used for progressive calculations using a series of data values. However, when the formula is copied down, the series filled down, all but one cell shows incorrect results. Most likely cause this misfire is, and we actually demonstrated this live in class. We did a fill down and we said, oh, okay, this is like an anchor. So the description of this scenario, the keyword that might trigger some memory is the word anchor. You have a value that as you repeat the calculation down the screen, you don't want to have to repeat the same value down the screen like it. When you repeat the same value down the screen like the rest of the data, trying to make a graph becomes a mess. That's the whole point, okay? So that's absolute. The omission of an absolute cell reference using the dollar character to anchor both the column and the row. So you have to have like $B, $6. I hope that made sense. Now I'm going to move faster. And unless somebody says, hey, can you explain that more? Or I have a question. That'll save us on some time. Okay. A creative need. So in this multiple choice question, the user of a Linux system must create small data files and custom programs. The system does not have the capacity to connect to the internet. There is no software of any kind installed. Is everybody familiar with the movies, the movie series, Mission Impossible?
Yeah.
Okay.
Mhm.
Have you ever found yourself in a place where the internet isn't working and so you can't download software and what you need isn't on?
Wait, are we talking about like the OG Mission Impossible? I was speaking all this time, but my thing was on mute.
Yeah, sure. Old Mission Impossible, new Mission Impossible. Well, the old Mission Impossible, you had a theme song like da 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 right? That Mission Impossible. So you have a Linux system, you got to get a job done, but your internet is out. There's no internet and there's no software on that machine. What is the quickest and most efficient action that can be taken to start work? Yeah, that cat command. In the appendix, well, in the study guide appendix and or references, you can start capturing commands for programming statements using cat and write those direct to a source code file that you can then run in Python or compile. So you can use the cat command not just to display the contents of a data file, but you can also use the cat command to create your own software or write your own scripts. Now, why am I telling you this? If you learn this method as a hacker, and hackers do, one of the things that hackers learn is, okay, I got nothing to work with. I'm on a remote system. The software I need doesn't exist. I want some custom software to do the following tasks on this remote system before anybody realizes what's going on. They use this method, the cat command, to redirect statements into data files so you can actually run programs. And that's in one of our references somewhere. Any questions about this item?
Is it like from scratch?
Say again?
All right, so you know how you make it from nothing, but it still has like a platform, but like straight from scratch. That's what you're referring to?
Yeah, was that a question or?
Yeah, it was a question. So I was like, you said that you can use the cat command to like create a software system like from scratch, correct?
Yes. Yeah, that's correct. So the same command I use to show the contents of a file, if I use it a little differently, then what I type into the terminal, I can write it directly into a file and then I can run it like software. It's actually pretty cool. It's actually very cool. So why are we saying this? A lot of people think you have to have a lot of fancy lab equipment to get the job done. And actually, if you have as little as a $35 Raspberry Pi, you have all you need to create your own digital universe. If you know a little Python, and we're going to be learning Python in the next module. So that's where you put your tray tables and your seat backs in the locked and upright position, and you fasten your seat belts because things are going to get interesting in the next module. All right. Resolving errors. You would like to resolve errors that occur whenever the anyone group, and that's also called everyone or global, attempts to execute a program, a custom program in a directory. You verify that the correct ownership and primary group is assigned to the program files, and these are located in the research directory. As the owner of the directory and programs, you want all rights enabled. Members of the researchers group to have read and execute privileges, and all others who may access the program to have execute privileges. Which command will achieve this purpose? Well, one of the things in the Linux survival guide that they explain is that, and you use the change mod or change mode command, right? And 7, the number 7 turns on all of the read, write, and execute. Does everybody remember, oops, this stuff right here? This business right here. We were talking about permissions. So the creator of this directory called templates has read, write, and execute permissions. The group it belongs to has read and execute permissions. And everyone else in the world has read and execute. Well, let's take this file as an we just created this one, right? Everybody's with me? I just created that one. It's not a directory, it's a file. There's no D in front right here. Okay, that's what the dash means. I can read and write that file, but I can't execute it. So even though I created it, the execute permission isn't turned on. How many of you took some kind of computer architecture, networking class? Anybody?
Yes.
Okay. So
Affirmative.
do you remember your binary basics?
Yes, zeros and ones
Zeros and
denote
ones.
the code to make the words. It is a type of communication to which we can communicate with computers.
Right. Everybody see my screen?
Yeah.
So this is binary information, right? And what we have here is an off and an on and an off. So ones and zeros are actually literally, quite literally on and off, meaning current is flowing and current is not flowing. And if I have, instead of this, if I had a owner, and then I had group, and then I had everyone else, and I wanted to turn on, if I knew that for each of these, I had a read, oops, a write, and an execute. I'm sorry, let's see, a read, a write, and an execute. And a read, and a write, and an execute. And I wanted to enable reading. I wanted to turn it on so it was lit up. So consider the yellow highlight like turning on a light bulb, okay? Is everybody with me? Okay. Now here's the cool part. What I really have here is a 1 and a 0 and a 1. Meaning the read is turned on, the write is turned off. Yeah. The write is turned off and the execute is turned on. Now, you're still saying, okay, get on with it. What's the point? This binary value is also a decimal number. The ones place is turned on, the twos place is turned off, and the fours place is turned on. The binary, the decimal equivalent of this binary number is what? Anybody? Anybody? What's 4 plus 1?
5.
5. I turn on the ones place. The twos place is turned off. The fours place is turned on. I have the value of 1 and 4, which equals the decimal number 5. Now let's let's go back to this. Does everybody see these numbers? 7 is this. How do I get 7? Well, if I turn on all 3 privileges for the owner so that the owner can read and write and execute, I have a 1 in this space. It's called a bit level operation. So I'm turning on a bit or turning off a bit at each point. I turn on execute, I turn on write, and I turn on read. Well, the equivalent of that number is what? What is it now? Well, I've turned on the 1's place, and I have a 2 and I have a 4. Quick, what's 1 plus 2 plus 4?
8.
It's a 7.
Damn it.
So if I want to turn on all the privileges for the owner, I use a 7 for the first number. That's what this is. I said, hey, we want the owner to do everything, all the rights enabled. So when I'm using the change mod command, I want to use this number for the owner, this number for the group, and this number for everyone else. So what are we saying? Let's look at this. This number for the owner, 111. This number for the group. Everyone knows that's 5, right?
Yes.
And what privilege do I have? I can read and write, I can read and execute. But can I make changes? Can I write changes to this?
No.
Yeah, the group can't make changes. They can read a data file, they can execute it if it's a program, but they can't write changes to it. The owner can write changes to it. So in my change mod command, the first number represents owner privileges, and it's the binary number expressed as a decimal number. The group is expressed as a decimal number. I only want everyone to execute. I don't want them to read the source code, and I don't want them to write to it. Sometimes I want to protect my source code. I don't want people seeing how my code works or what it does. I just don't. Does that make sense? Right? It's called job security. So you can create code that does something magical, and everybody's like, how'd you do that? I'm like, I'm not telling you. That's why you have to pay me. That's why I have a job here. It's called job security. Okay? I'm not turning on if I turn off the read feature, everyone that gets on that system, regardless of who they are, they can't read it. Now, if they're a member of my group and I trust them, they can read the source code. And the owner of the system can even change my source code if it's necessary. But everyone can use it. So everyone can execute the software I create, but they can't read the source code and they can't change it. They can't write it. That one is this number. 0, 0, 1, which in decimal form is what? 1. That's what this is. So there's your command. Change mode, all permissions, partial permissions, only 1 permission. Now you'll get change mod commands that use every number from 1 to 7. And sometimes you'll see it with a 0. You'll see 750, which means that everyone in the world doesn't have anything. What are we saying? If we put a 0 there at the end, we're doing this. We're cleaning that off, okay? I hope that is a sensible way to explain the bit level operators that are used in Linux to turn on and off permissions for different constituents. The owner creator people in the same group and everyone else in the world. That's how Linux works. Now in Windows, you can create all kinds of groups and you can put groups within groups. So you can have like, you can have a St. Thomas students group and a St. Croix students group. And then I can put them in the CSC 239, both of those groups inside the CSC 239 group. And that way I just cover them all because I can basically set up my groups and my security permissions in a very granular way in Windows. And that's something we cover in both of our operating system classes, CSC 255, and we cover it in CSC 410. Any questions about this item right here? I know we didn't spend a lot of time on that before in previous classes, and I thought I would share a little more about it this time. I didn't put you to sleep, did I?
No.
Yeah, permissions. People don't, they're trying to execute something and it doesn't work. It's in the wrong, they're in the wrong place. Or they don't have the right permissions. Right? And there was something else. The 3 Ps. Yeah, that's going to come up. That's going to keep coming up. Would you like to resolve errors that occur when whatever the group anyone attempts to execute custom programs in a directory? You verify that the correct ownership and primary group is assigned to the program files, and these are located in the /research directory. So you've checked to make sure, okay, it's not a path issue or position, and you've verified the right privileges, they're assigned to the right, groups. As the owner of the directory and programs, you want all rights enabled. Members of the researchers group have to read and execute, and all others who may access the programs to have execute privileges. Oh, is this the same? This is the same question. I'm sorry. My regrets, but hey, it's okay to unmute your mic and say, Professor Kentop, what are you doing? That's the same question. There we go. Resolving execute errors. Oh, progressively slower system. So this was a question that threw off a number of our students. A researcher uses Control-Z over the workday to close terminals running on a Linux system and notices by the afternoon, the system response is very slow. So when I connected to my system remotely on campus, when I signed off, instead of using the exit command, I used Control-C. Okay. Or I used Control-Z. So what we're saying is that somebody got on remotely and then they used Control-Z. The answer is use Control-C or Control /, that's a backslash, not a /, to truly terminate the terminal window each time. So this is something that happens quite a bit, especially when people are sharing. If they know about Control-Z, they'll connect using SSH, and then instead of typing exit to clear gracefully, they'll use control sequence, shortcut keys, right? Control-Z, like this. If I do something in here and it goes screwy, I can use Control-Z, and that Control-Z will get me out of something that's a runaway freight train. Okay. So I could, if I let's say I did a ping command, and I'll just ping myself here, right? I'll ping myself. And then while it's pinging, I want to stop it. A lot of people will use they'll try to use Control-Z to drop a command because it's running, seems like it's stuck and they want to stop it, they'll use Control Z to stop. It's considered good form to use Control C or the Control \. Are there any questions about this item? Let's keep moving along. We'll run down to about here and then we'll stop. Multiple choice question. A researcher wants to run a command over time in a terminal remotely so that others can efficiently use the system while waiting for the results. It's nice to use the nice command because other users can work with that system. That's how you remember this. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. So you have somebody who wants to run a command. Other people are trying to use the system. The researcher wants to be nice so that others can use it. So they use the nice command. Pretty straightforward. Which Linux command will display the full permissions assigned to all groups who may have access to selected files and directories? It's this command. That's one reason why we recommend using that. If you use these other commands, you will only get a partial list of group permissions, the primary group. But what can happen is that in Linux, if somebody does know the group add commands, you can tack on additional user groups to a given resource. So that's the best command. Any questions? You want to combine, person learning Linux commands wants to combine A and B data files named a.dat and b.dat that happen to list identical values, a subject ID in the first column. However, the desired output should not repeat the identical subject ID values. So if you do that, what happens is you end up getting extra information in there and it pollutes your data work. It actually makes more work as these have to then be removed, right? So if somebody does this, it creates an extra problem. The problem is that each time this command is used to create, the customer ID column repeats and is listed in between the other data fields. What command can be used instead of paste to combine the different data values without repeating the first column? Well, that's what you demonstrated in the solution. We use the join command. Any questions? So join is better than paste if you don't want to duplicate values. Okay, we're running a little short on time. Does anyone want to see an item that we haven't covered yet? It looks like we won't be able to do all of the rest. Let's do this multiple answer. The multiple answers seemed to really bother people. Is that a deal? Do we have a couple more minutes together to review the rest of the multiple answers?
Yeah, we could do that.
Okay. So a researcher is certain a custom Python application is stored in one of the directories. That should read one of the directories of the current home profile, and that the current updated version of Python is properly loaded on the system. So we know that the Python is current and we know it's in the right directory. However, the commands to use the tool fail repeatedly. The following are potential causes of this common failure. Permissions, where you are, what place you're in. And here's a fun part. When you're using Python, you have to use this / in front of a Python program when you run it. So the command lacks the characters / to specify use of the current directory path. That's one of those finer points that's mentioned in the study guide or addendum. Any questions about this? Now, why isn't this answer the correct answer? Well, a person doesn't have to own a file or a resource to use it. You use change ownership to reassign who gets to own something, but you don't have to claim ownership to run a program. You just have to turn on the right permissions, okay? It says the Python application is not installed and must be compiled from source code. No, Python doesn't work with source code. I mean, Python is an interpreted programming language. That means that compiling source code isn't part of that picture. That's a finer point about Python, but it says Python is properly loaded. So that can't be the answer because we've already explained the Python is loaded properly. Any questions about this one? Two more multi-answer and then we're done. Here's a multiple answer. Lost in Linux space. A student is entering commands in a Linux terminal shell using an online reference to solve a problem in a time-sensitive situation. They're in a hurry. It becomes painfully obvious after 5 minutes of furious typing that the student has no idea what directory is now active for the prompt, and most commands do not work, returning file not found or command not found errors. The student concludes the most important thing is to determine the working active directory and return back to the home directory. What steps or common practices are recommended to ensure the most sensible and efficient recovery for this common situation? So this happens all the time. Students start working with Raspberry Pi or Linux and they lose their way and they don't know how to get back. Well, there's two quick commands, pwd and cd space tilde. If you look in the upper left corner of your keyboard, there's like a backward slanted apostrophe. And if you hit the shift key and hit that, there's this swoopy looking character. The tilde is what's used to give the distinction between ene and enye in Spanish, right? Everybody knows what I'm talking about? In Espanol, enye. Am I saying that right? Any people?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, here we go. Last item, and then we'll sign off. And if you would please, by the end of the week, be sure that you complete your final attempt of the Module 1 assessment after you reconcile, okay? And I'll put this recording out online so that you can reconcile Module 2, okay? A student must model a progressive series of results as some inputs or values are changed and others are held constant using an Excel spreadsheet. The results must also be charted on graphs and rapidly modified to assess alternate cases. We call these hypotheticals, or, I mean, there's a number of names, but basically you can simulate, right? You can test for different values. What steps or common practices are recommended to ensure the most sensible and efficient result? Well, this gets back to the Excel exercise with OLE. You want to use object linking and embedding. You want constant values isolated in the upper and left side of the cell series. And dynamic values should be arranged using a series right and down the column. And that's where you use the fill down commands, okay? Any questions about this item? These two answer choices would create a spreadsheet that's completely backwards. I'm going to stop sharing. And I'll stop recording